Ayan, magandang gabi sa ating mga kababayan. Thank you so much for joining us from different platforms dito sa TikTok, YouTube, Facebook, among others. Sabi ko nga, maging hopefully more active na rin tayo dito sa TikTok dahil paparating na tayo sa election at obviously pagdating sa ating mga kababayan, more and more people are also rely on TikTok. But of course, not as much as hindi ganun ka dami yung long form. Of course, TikTok is supposed to be short form, so tinitry din natin itong mga live versions ng TikTok. At of course, thank you din pala. Meron din palang mga stars and gift and support din pala sa TikTok. So thank you so much sa lahat ng mga sumusuporta sa atin despite the fact man medyo dinadagsan tayo ng trolls sa TikTok. But thank you very much again, guys. Ito today, some of you may have stumbled upon dun sa mga interviews natin from early morning, yung sa 9 a.m., yung sa 3 p.m. naman. Tuloy-tuloy ito mga interviews at saka mga sinusulat natin ukol dito sa inauguration ni Donald Trump, the greatest president. And of course, anong implication niya para sa Pilipinas. But actually, sa totoo lang, today, mas gusto kong pag-usapan itong topic na, we keep on going back to throughout the weeks and all, but I want to do it in a much more systematic way. So, gamitin po natin dun sa mga willing to learn, hindi yung mga katulad nung iba na medyo, medyo hater trolls. Yung mga tao na medyo gusto mag-level up. Pag-usapan natin, Antonio Gramsci. Ito po yung paborito natin na Italian thinker from almost exactly 100 years ago who has had many views, who shared many ideas that could be very, very helpful to us. So we're gonna go from Donald John Trump to Antonio Gramsci very quickly, and then we're gonna end up with what I feel are really good feelings, no, about the future of the pink movement. All right? So pag-usapan natin 'yan, guys. So as I said, signpost lang muna tayo para alam ng tao ng pag-usapan natin. So medyo more. So ito yung article na pag-usapan natin. This was my column today. Marcos, Marx, and the pink movement, right? Pag-usapan natin 'yan. But before that, let me just give some preliminary or general ideas about etong basa ko kay Donald Trump 2.0. First of all, this is the first time in exactly 40 years po na hindi naganap yung inauguration doon sa open field, sa National Mall, no? So, siguro yung hopes ni Donald Trump to talk about millions and millions, yung ganon, medyo hindi natuloy. But, in fairness, yung pag-move niya sa indoor is not totally unprecedented because in 1985, back then, Ronald Reagan had won a decisive re-election. When I say decisive, hindi yung mga 1-2 million lang yung difference, hindi 49 to 51% split. No, Ronald Reagan won close to 60% of the popular vote, around 58% plus, and he won 500 plus electoral colleges. Talagang decimation yung ginawa niya. And I want to talk about Ronald Reagan to a certain degree because mahalaga siya in terms of understanding what could Donald Trump 2.0 also mean for us. Because nung tumakbo si Reagan first time against Jimmy Carter, of course, swerte siya because Jimmy Carter was very unpopular. The context here is the oil crisis, the Volcker shocks, and the Iranian crisis, among others. But still, maraming hindi sumiseryoso kay Ronald Reagan back in the day. Artista lang yan. Yan, sige, nakalusot ng konti, naging governor ng California, pero hindi yan presidential. So by the time that he was giving his indoor address in 1985, after winning a truly landslide victory, right, he felt very vindicated. And he felt so vindicated na yung ginawa niya dun sa kanyang inauguration speech was to talk about essentially, a new century of conservatism. And in fairness to Ronald Reagan, very effective siya in terms of mainstreaming some of the fundamental principles of conservatism and neoliberalism. Yung idea na private sector and the market should take over, that the government should be small, that the problem is the government, that private initiative is important. And ito yung interesting, of course, yung paradox ng peace through strength. No? Peace through strength. Which, of course, goes back to the Roman saying that, if you want peace, you have to prepare for war, right? So a lot of that nakikita natin with Donald Trump. I think if you look at Donald Trump kagabi or kaninang umaga, he seemed very vindicated. Halos lahat ng mga major elites of the world were there. Hindi lang yung mga tech titans, of course, the three richest men, Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos, and Elon Musk, ay natin gayan yung pag ano salute niya, baka makasuhan pa tayo. Um, and then of course you also had, the essentially the kings of the fashion industry, Arnault, for instance, who owns Louis Vuitton, Chanel, name all of the top French brands. So the owners of those, the family that owns all of those brands, yung asawa niya, yung anak niya, who lead, including of course yung favorite natin, Tiffany and Co. Right? Lahat yan sa kanila yan. They were also in attendance. Also in attendance were all the living presidents from the past. Of course, Jimmy Carter just passed away the other month. But andun si Bill Clinton, andun din si Hillary Clinton, andun si Obama, andun si George W. Bush. So lahat ng mga tao na inatake ni Trump, lahat ng tao na inaway niya throughout years, they still showed up as a sign of support. So I think that more or less 1,000 people who were there, eto talagang cream de la creme. I think kasama din mga Paul brothers, Joe Rogan, and some of the big podcasters and influencers, not to mention yung paborito natin boxer, si Mike Tyson, right? Andun rin. So, I think the tone and the cadence of the speech was very subdued, very statesman-like. But yung content ng kanyang speech, I think, was very much Trump, very much MAGA, and very much prepare and buckle up for 4 years of very, very transformative politics. No? So I think na-feel talaga ni Donald Trump na vindicated siya. Now, obviously, he passed what? More than 70-ish executive orders in the first few hours at he made a big deal out of signing each of them. Talaga makita mo, magaling talaga si Donald Trump pagdating sa reality show, right? He makes politics feel like a reality show. Really, yung entertainment factor, malakas talaga sa kanya. And these are things that we want to talk about more later on when we talk about pink movement and opposition and all. So talagang this was his crowning achievement. That Trumpism was absolutely vindicated at the political level, embraced by the global elite. You also had ministers from different countries. Foreign Minister Jaishankar, someone who we, of course, crossed paths with the last month in New Delhi. He was very much front row. There were just a dozen or so na ininbita, guys, na foreign leaders. So, hindi totoo yung sinasabi ng mga ka-DDS natin na si BBM lang yung na-stop. No, actually, a few were just invited. Meloni, Giorgia Meloni of Italy, who showed up. Milei, the president of Argentina, who showed up. Hindi nag-show up yung isa, si Viktor Orban, leader ng Hungary. But anyways, there were like half a dozen or so were invited and some of them showed up. But mostly, ang mga tao nandyan, yung mga ambassadors, and in the case of China, a vice minister, the highest level of representation. So at, of course, importantly, andun din ang TikTok CEO. Yes, the gentleman is Singaporean, but he works for ByteDance based in China. So it was really interesting in a sense that you could really see a constellation of the elites of the elites and the big tech titans. Everyone was there. So I think if you were Donald Trump, even if hindi nangyari yung millions and millions ng mga tao, at least you got the 1,000 creme de la creme, at least from a Trumpian perspective of essentially the who's and who of world politics, business, and industry, right? Now, if you look at the executive orders, there are a couple of things that I think really show us that things are going to get tricky in the United States. Obviously, a big part of the Donald Trump brand was to reverse yung mga woke stuff, including critical race theory, including some of the education programs na that the Republicans feel as an affront to, of course, white America, America's sacred sense of its history, and also, of course, gender issues, culture issues, right? Very clear, see President Trump that there's only two, right? Are they a male or a female? So which was a direct assault on federally funded programs na may kinalaman dun sa the usual progressive idea na gender is fluid, and the whole spectrum argumentation, etc. I don't want to go into lectures on Judith Butler's theories on gender and sexuality, but anyways, that was really something. And then of course you also saw really expression of Christianity and religiosity. Jesus Christ was mentioned, so hindi lang in general terms, but importantly you also had people like J.D. Vance making the Catholic sign of cross. So again, you could see very strong expression of religiosity. You also saw a very strong expression of at least spirituality by President Donald Trump when he mentioned the fact na nakasurvive siya, no? He was able to survive assassination really by, uh, you know, a tenth of an inch, right, or a millimeter rather. He felt that, my sense of mission na siya lalo. That whatever sense of mission that brought him to power in 2017, it was further reinforced by his miraculous survival of that assassination attempt in Pennsylvania last year. And I remember I was just walking down. I just arrived from Amsterdam in The Hague. It was around 1 a.m. or so, very late in the night, and then immediately I saw the news. At first, I couldn't believe it, and like, oh my goodness. So you could sense na talaga Donald Trump feels that he is carrying the burden of history. So I'm trying to be as fair as possible. Obviously, we can make fun of him. Obviously, you can make fun of all of his claims na pinakamalaking landslide, siya yung pinaka nag-suffer na president. I mean, hello. There are other presidents actually got assassinated. A couple of them, President Garfield, President, Abraham Lincoln obviously had a horrible time as a president during the Civil War. Things were not easy. Reagan had multiple assassination attempts on him. So, you had the usual Donald Trump exaggeration, hyperbole, I am the center of the universe stuff. But I think it was very subdued, and the cadence really reflected the fact that just like Reagan in 1985, exactly 40 years ago, Donald Trump in 2025 feels that history is on his side, right? Very, very interesting. Very, very interesting. Now, just quickly on this, anong paki natin sa Pilipinas? Anong paki natin sa US? Well, obviously, uh, one of the things that the president announced was a national emergency dun sa kanilang border issue, immigration issue, which is a serious issue. So, ibig sabihin yan, in the first 100 days of Donald Trump, expect a very, very strict approach and really big, flashy kind of outcome-based approach to illegal immigration. So as we speak, a lot of countries are negotiating repatriation of thousands, if not tens of thousands of their citizens. And actually, dito ang suggestion ko, because I was in India last month and was talking to some of our good friends in India. And as you know, there are 750,000 illegal Indians residing in the United States. The elite visa, the genius visa, is also given to a lot of tech experts from India, is also coming under pressure nowadays by the MAGA movement. So ang ginawa ng Indian government was to negotiate the repatriation of close to 18,000 Indians who are illegally residing in America. And I think that was a very smart move. Bakit kamo? Because it's very symbolic and it's very performative. So it looks like a major concession, but that means you get out around 17, 18,000 Indians, but you keep more than 720,000, 730,000 Indians in America. And you also make sure that the best and brightest Indians can still go to America, make a ton of money, and send back money, right? While it is true na may pagka-brain drain ng nangyari, yung mga graduates ng IIT, the smartest electrical engineer people, techie people in India go to the US, statistics show that huge part of yung kanilang sweldo ay actually nare-repatriate nila sa India. So Indians work in America in the tech sectors, in the high-paying job sectors, actually are a huge source of remittance for the Indian government. So very, very smart. Very, very smart itong strategy ng India. And I actually said almost something along those lines. I was not aware of the negotiations of India, pero sabi ko kanina dun sa interview live at saka sinabi ko earlier, Philippines can do the same. So maybe ang pwede natin gawin is kausapin natin ng Trump administration. We repatriate around 10, 15,000 Filipinos. Siguro yung lalo na yung iba na hindi ganong ka-deep yung kanilang roots sa America. I know this sounds horrible because of course, gusto natin lahat ng mga kababayan natin eventually find their footing in the United States, find jobs, whatever. But the reality is that Trump wants to show something. Hundreds of thousands will have to be, he wants to kick out hundreds of thousands, if not a million or so, within his first 100 days or at least his first year. So, ang suggestion ko dyan, guys, is that maybe we can cooperate with the United States. Kasi hindi pwedeng repatriate, itapon mo lang. They have to come back to their home country. So maybe we can get a few thousand of our kababayan in, and then to make sure that the hundreds of thousands of other Filipinos, because more than 300,000 Filipinos yata ang TNT sa America, they can stay. And because alam naman natin yung mga kababayan natin, even if TNT sila, ang laki po ng kanilang contribution sa America, ang laki po ng contribution nila sa ekonomiya ng Amerika. Ang laki po ng contribution nila sa ekonomiya ng Pilipinas kasi nagpapadala sila. At of course, marami sa kanila ay very embedded within their communities, etc. So maybe guys, we can follow in the footsteps of India and do something along those lines. So obviously, we'll interview again Ambassador Maldes to get at least officially the position of the government. Um, but these are some of the hard truths that we have to look at as we speak. Actually, the policy of the Philippine government is to just encourage yung mga TNT to repatriate on their own. Obviously, mahal yan, expensive yan, difficult yan. A lot of our kababayan are living in fear, etc. So maybe we can negotiate along some lines. But you have to give some sort of concession to Trump on this issue so that you can protect the interests of majority of Filipinos and protect also our bilateral relationship. I know it sounds extremely callous, and extremely, if someone would say, inhumane. But this is the reality of dealing with someone like Donald Trump. O, yung marami sa ating mga kababayan na patay kay Donald Trump. Kasi this was the ridiculous situation, right? Mas maraming Pilipino ay pro-Trump sa mga surveys kaysa yung mga Filipino-Americans. Because alam na alam ng ating mga kababayan sa Amerika na ito ang mangyayari ngayon. Yung very strict crackdown on illegal immigration and tighter restrictions on immigration, not to mention visa restrictions, etc. So, mas mahirap talaga. So, yung mga Trumper natin na kaibigan dyan, be careful what you wish for. And here we are, day one of Trump, more than 70 executive agreement. U.S. is withdrawing from the Paris Agreement on climate change. The U.S. is withdrawing from the World Health Organization. My goodness, ang dami mga, how should I put it, medyo edgy stuff ang nangyayari ngayon. So, that's what I'm saying, guys. Unfortunately, andito na tayo, so we have to deal with the situation as it is. Now, just some general points. I've been talking about this for quite some time. May mga articles tayo on this issue. Again, you can look at it. Ang idea ko lang dito ay simple lang. No one knows for sure anong gusto ni Donald Trump pagdating sa foreign policy. This is a guy who just follows his gut feelings. This is a guy who follows his businessman, real estate, art of the deal feelings. So wala siyang coherent vision of foreign or defense policy. One day he'll say amazing things about China, and next thing he'll impose tariffs on them. But for now, it looks like Trump is in a business mode. So that explains why, very weirdly, he's extending yung TikTok even though well past yung legally yung time. In fact, you had Senator Cotton of Arkansas, Republican, hardline Republican, who said, no, you cannot give another 90 days reprieve kasi tapos na, naban na, at na-approve na rin ng Supreme Court yan. But apparently, Trump being Trump, he's pushing for extra 90 days. Mike Waltz, the National Security Advisor, said that they're looking at a deal whereby China can still hold on to the TikTok ownership, but the data centers could be shifted to the United States, or some sort of firewall could be established. Some, like Elon Musk, are already positioning themselves to potentially buy TikTok United States. And then, of course, there are people like Lindsey Graham, very close to the president, who are saying there's no way that they can work with TikTok because if you look at the ownership structure of TikTok, based on their analysis, no less than Chairman Xi Jinping and the Chinese leadership has a direct say in how TikTok operates. So this is clearly a national security threat. So let's see. But it's just amazing how Elon Musk and Donald Trump and all are all love, love, love. And according to Trump, he has a soft spot for TikTok, which just tells you guys a lot about how much this person has a sense of integrity or coherence in foreign policy. And yes, of course, the fact that you had the TikTok CEO right next to Tulsi Gabbard, the head of the national intelligence, that tells you something like what's going on here, right? You cannot go on years and years talking about TikTok as a national security threat, and the next thing you know, you put the head of TikTok right next dyan sa TikTok CEO, right? So, let's see. It's gonna be a rough ride. It's gonna be an interesting ride. Ang dami mga pwedeng mangyayari. And let me just end on this point. I think a lot will depend on the evolution of the balance of power within Donald Trump's cabinet. Mike Waltz, being a political appointee and national security advisor and close to the president, working in the White House, he's traditional, but he's willing to a little bit bend some of these arguments, including the TikTok issue. But if you look at Pete Hegseth, and more important, if you look at Mark Rubio, very, very clear yung stance nila na pagdating sa Pilipinas, pagdating sa frontline states, they have to provide us maximum support, that the Philippines is a country that is important and they have to make sure that hindi lang purong armas Dapat meron din mga investments sa Philippines. So Marco Rubio is saying all the right things, including the importance of the NATO alliance. Pete Hegseth also said something along the lines that the U.S. has to focus more on China and the Indo-Pacific region. So traditional arguments essentially by these people. But then there's Elon Musk, shadow president, shadow diplomat, doing his own thing with China, doing his own things with Russia and Iran. So let's look at how things are going to evolve. Depending on who has more say within the cabinet, I think, we'll have a better understanding of who doesn't get purged. Because actually, kanina lang na-purge si yung dating special envoy niya sa Middle East, may natanggal na kaagad. May mga natanggal na kaagad day one pa lang ni Donald Trump kasi dami nilang sinasabi, natanggal tuloy sila. In fact, the very guy who was in charge of transition, si Hook, who was in charge of transition team within the State Department, tinanggal siya kanina lang ni Donald Trump. So this is going to be a bumpy ride. We really don't know which faction will come on top. But officially speaking, if you look at the head of Pentagon, head of the State Department, and to a great degree the National Security Advisor, all of them are very traditionalist and all of them very much hawkish on China. So sorry na lang sa mga ka-DDS natin because I think our DDS friends are making a lot of noise about, oh, but he said nice things about China, oh, but he's nice to TikTok, whatever. Yes, correct yung observation ng ibang tao. My sense with the current MAGA composition, with MAGA leadership, is that they're much more soft on Russia than China, and there are a lot of them also are open to making a deal with Iran. So it's an interesting situation we're seeing here. So anyone who pretends to know what's going to be the exact final policy of Donald Trump, they don't know what they're talking about, right? So if there are many people inside the MAGA movement, very influential people who are sick and tired of war, sick and tired of U.S. assisting other countries in wars, and sick and tired of U.S. getting involved in wars. They're isolationists, they're insulationists. They want America to focus on its own problems, on its own economy, and its own people. Kaya, dapat di tayo magtataka na sinabi ni Donald Trump kanina na he is a peacemaker. And his legacy, he wants his legacy to be to end wars rather than start wars, which was a job again at Biden, Obama, and all of these goody Democrats who actually have been engaged in all sorts of war. Not to mention Donald Trump also immediately took credit for the Gaza ceasefire, which I think he has a right to take credit for because every indication suggests that the Israeli leadership has more respect for Trump than Biden, and a big part of their decision, not entirely, there are many military and domestic political factors, but um, because they were dealing with Trump and because Trump knows who's the superpower and he knows how to remind allies, smaller countries, who's the superpower, it looks like the Israeli government wasted no time to send the right signal to the incoming president, and that's why you got a ceasefire. So for the first time in 15 months, we had a sunset in Gaza without children or women dying. And also, of course, our hearts also go to the hostages who have been returned to their families, right? So, eto na. So Donald Trump, I think, rightly takes credit for that. But then again, if anyone is going to say, oh, that means there'll be no war and that something bigger is not going to happen, again, I don't think they know what they're talking about. So we have to look carefully at the evolution of the balance of power within the leadership. Let's look at how Mike Waltz, Pete Hegseth, Rubio, Elon Musk, how long they're gonna last, even, and how are they gonna how are they gonna essentially affect American foreign policy? Because Donald Trump is not gonna run American foreign policy on a daily basis. He's gonna make some tweets about, he likes the pomp and glamour and all of that, but the day-to-day policy of the U.S. will not be run by Donald Trump himself. He has to deal with so many other things, including America, right? And dami mga layers of that. So what you have to really look at is who are the top decision makers within the cabinet, and then look at the balance of power between them. That's the best suggestion I can give at this point in time. Now, I think that's a perfect transition. Let's now go at pag-usapan natin yung nangyayari sa Pilipinas. I don't want to play yung mga videos, etc. about Donald Trump. Mag-vitamins muna tayo. Medyo tayo eh. Medyo grabe yung natin. Sked natin kanina umaga pa dire-diretso. I want to talk about this column na sinulat natin na kakalabas lang kahapon or kanina actually. Still it's Tuesday. Sa Philippine Daily Inquirer, Marcos Marxism and the Pink Movement, right? Again, I think here makikita niyo guys how I approach the current conjuncture in Philippine politics. No, we have to be very serious about it. At dapat talaga titignan natin anong dapat predisposition, anong dapat strategiya ng opposition dito, genuine opposition dito. So let me go to this column and then we can expand on it. Now, obviously, for some of you who have been following us on different platforms, and especially yung ating mga conversations with Walden Bellio and of course with Ronald Llamas the other day, not to mention some of the other conversation I've had with Ronald Llamas the other day, someone that keeps on popping up in our conversation is the figure of Antonio Gramsci, whom I believe is very helpful to understanding what we should do in our era. Now, just to give you an idea how important Antonio Gramsci is, obviously, he was anti-fascist and communist, kaya effectively pinatay ni Mussolini back in the day. And before he died, he said, I'm going to start writing a book, writing a work no longer just for daily journalism, but write something for eternity. Now, this guy was so influential that even right-wing post-fascist leaders, including no less than Giorgia Meloni, the current prime minister of Italy, are also reading him to make sense out of Italy's own politics today. So this is an article I suggest you guys read. Why Giorgia Meloni loves Antonio Gramsci. So Antonio Gramsci was technically a Marxist, leftist. Meloni is a post-fascist. So in a way, they should be ideological enemies. But because this guy is so smart, and his ideas are so relevant to our time, even the right-wing leaders are reading from Antonio Gramsci. So let me break this down because when I make interventions on matters of anong dapat gawin ng opposition, hindi ito galing sa bara-bara or kung anong 'di ba? Hindi ito kwentong barbero. Although minsan magandang kwentong barbero, wala akong problema diyan. But actually it's drawn from really days and nights and months and years of really profound reflection on the dilemmas of being a genuine opposition, dilemmas of being a genuine Democrat in a moment whereby everything is falling apart, when everything is uncertain, and when it's when the dark forces are taking over or have already taken over. And the idea is that what on earth should we do, right? So if you may indulge me, let me just read from my work on Antonio Gramsci. Obviously this is just a column, so I'll have to have a longer essay kung saan pwede natin talaga pag-usapan ng masinsinan itong mga theories ni Antonio Gramsci. I mean, kung may budget lang tayo at saka oras, more important oras, sana mag-lecture series din tayo ng Antonio Gramsci and we can go through and through. But what we try to do here dito sa ating maliit na platforms is just to give you an idea of what are the things that we have to pay attention to. Right? What are the basic things that we have to pay attention to? So take it as a kind of a preview, right? A preview of important thinkers, right? That we have to look at. So basahin lang natin, no? And then I'll of course build on these arguments as we go along. Okay. So this is a direct quotation actually from Antonio Gramsci, which I felt was very, very, very useful and very, very instructive in light of itong mga conversation natin sa GAA, sa alleged corruptions. Just as I said, the Duterte, sasakyan na naman ng issue na yan, kung ano namang fake news na naman sinasabi ng mga Dutertes just to make themselves look as if sila yung opposition, just to make themselves look as if sila yung anti-corruption, etc. And to kind of justify their break with the Marcoses when in fact it was all about just power. It had nothing to do with principles. And as I said, if you want to talk about corruption, actually the Philippines ranks in the corruption index was worse in 2021 under Duterte than the current president. Although, of course, I look forward to looking at the rankings in 2025 after this latest budget comes out. But anyway, so this is a direct quote from Gramsci that I feel is very, very helpful to get things into motion. Antonio Gramsci says, between consent and force stands corruption, which is characteristic of situations when it is hard to exercise the hegemonic function and the use of force is too risky. Yun ang warning ni Antonio Gramsci almost exactly a century earlier. In short, ang sinasabi ni Antonio Gramsci here is that minsan ang Estado or yung mga trapo, usage of force, military force or police force is a little bit too expensive. At the same time, there are times na nawawalan sila ng legitimacy or sense of authority. So corruption is their kind of a middle strategy, right? Corruption is one way by the ruling class to hold the coalition together and also to buy over the consent of people when they lack force or they lack the will to force or they lack the hegemonic influence or legitimacy for that matter, right? So confronting the specter of fascism, Gramsci emphasized the need for building a broad, inclusive, and robust coalition of progressive liberal forces to stem the tide of violent reactionary politics. So what Gramsci was actually trying to understand 100 years ago was this. Ano yung mga strategiya at saka mga methodologies at tactics na ginagamit ng ruling elite, in his case, conservatives and fascists, to keep themselves in power. So you look at the role of force, he look at the role of corruption, and he look at the role of consent or influence, right? So very much influenced by Machiavelli's concepts of deception and force, he came up also with versions of consent, force, and of course the role of corruption. These things are very, very important. Now, what makes Gramsci very helpful and very relevant to our era is also his emphasis on the fact that kung gusto mong kalabanin yung mga trapo at mga masasamang tao in charge or the dark forces, it is very, very important. All right? It's extremely important to be open to coalition building. Huwag kang mag-engage, huwag kang mag-cancel culture, huwag kang mag-purist. You have to be open to broad, inclusive, and robust coalition of whoever progressive, liberal, anti-fascist forces you can bring together. Because really that's the only way sometimes to save democracy and save the motherland for that matter, right? So Gramsci's genius lay in his ability to dispense with sloganeering, ideological posturing, and deterministic pseudoscientific theories in favor of pursuing an organic, tactically savvy, and strategically consequential strategy for progressive forces in moments of political crisis. In short, hindi siya mahilig doon sa mga pakyot, yung mga grand theories na mechanistic, deterministic na, hindi, hintayin lang natin yan. Next election, sigurado tayo manalo. Masasawa ng mga tao. Well, you used to hear that a lot in 2018 and 19. Next thing you know, Marcos and Duterte won in 2022. There's nothing automatic with history. You want political change, you fight for it. How do you fight for it? You don't fight for it based on pseudoscientific theories. You don't fight for it based on based on empty slogans and ideological purity, posturing, and all of that nonsense. No, you have to be tactically savvy, and you have to look at organic and organizational ways to get as many people as possible behind you. Accordingly, this is what Gramsci was against. He rejected all sorts of reductionist paradigms, yung mga very simplistic, very unhelpful forms of theories na hanggang ngayon narinig natin dun sa mga ibang kaibigan natin, right? What are these things? Unang-una, he rejects vacuous moralism. Yung idea na, Pilipinas, napaka-corrupt natin, tayong pinaka-corrupt, ito ang worst budget in the world, oh my goodness, hopeless case tayo, what we need is a moral revolution. Now, as I always say over and over again, yes, corruption is evil. Yes, masama ang corruption. But we also have to put that into a certain historical context. Most countries at our level of development had high levels of corruption. So there's a high level of correlation between weak state institutions, lower levels of economic development, and high levels of corruption. Kulang yung bayad sa mga pulis, kulang yung mga bayad sa mga ombudsman siguro, or hindi maayos yung institutions ng checks and balances mo, no? Mahina yung civil society mo, hindi maganda yung bayad sa mga journalists, kung so madali magkaroon ng mga bribery, hindi protektado yung mga journalists mo from harassment, etc. So when you are at very low level of development, corruption tends to be high because law enforcement, journalism, people in the government, everyone is susceptible to corruption. Not to mention, of course, vote buying, massive vote buying. When you have tens and tens of millions of people living below poverty line, it is very easy, right, for the rich people and the oligarchs and warlords to impose their will through corruption. So I always say corruption is evil, but it's not unique to us. It is not exceptional. I always say, instead of comparing the Philippines to Singapore of today, compare Philippines to the United States of late 19th century. Compare it to China in the 1990s. And even Vietnam, a country that is more or less at our level of development, Very successful sila, but also very corrupt. Levels of corruption in Vietnam are so crazy that two or three different presidents were changed over the past few years. So there's nothing singularly unique about us. We're not singularly uniquely corrupt. That is actually a very racist way of putting it. Tama si Leloy Claudia, and I really look forward to his new book coming out about these roots of this idea na this is a very colonial legacy. You know, the Americans and the Spanish, when they wanted to oppress us, they will say, oh, we don't want to give you this, we don't want to give you that kasi corrupt kayo, kasi ganyan kayo. You know, this is a very much colonial legacy and self-orientalization. Again, we're not saying that there's no corruption. Corruption is evil, it's bad. But this is not unique to the Philippines. Go to Nigeria, go to Egypt, go to Russia, go to China even today, go to Vietnam, go to a lot of developing countries around the world. Corruption is through the roof. It's bad. Even in some European Union countries, go to Romania, go to Hungary, right? It's interesting, yung sa mga kaibigan natin, pinapakita nila yung corruption rate and Philippines. Actually, makikita mo similar ang rankings ng Philippines and Thailand. And at Thailand, is twice richer than us in per capita income, is far more developed country in terms of manufacturing. So, in short, don't reduce everything just to moralistic arguments. So, as much as we have to be against corruption on moral ground, napaka-simplistic if all of your debate is just about how do we hanggang moral suasion lang. It's not gonna work. You have to look at the root causes why vote buying happens. You have to look at ways to strengthen the COMELEC, checks and balances. You have to strengthen media scrutiny. So hindi lang pwede voter education through moral suasion lang. It has to go beyond that. And that was what Gramsci was against. Gramsci was also against economism. Yung reducing everything to gut issues and pera. Pera lang yan kasi maraming pera itong mga to kaya nanalo. Well, let's not forget, in 2016 elections, Duterte was not really the biggest spender until the end of the race. The biggest spenders were the Binites, the biggest spenders, much more resources, si Mar Rojas, si Grace Po. So money alone doesn't explain everything in politics. Sometimes yung mga may pera pa, yung pa yung mga natatalo sa politika, right? I think hindi mananalo yung dalawang biggest spender. But anyway, okay. Alam mo na. Anyways, so you get what I'm saying. You cannot reduce everything to just money or gut issues or say, ganito bumoto mga tao dahil lang sa inflation. Yeah, like in the case of Trump, for instance, inflation was a big factor, but not the only factor. Immigration was also important. Also, this greater sense of, America's decline was important. Identity issues were also important. So when you reduce everything to just, it's just about inflation, it's just about corruption, it's very simplistic and it's very problematic kasi kung ganyan ang posturing mo, it's hard to build coalitions with other people who may have a different perspective in terms of ano yung ugat ng problema sa Pilipinas, right? Or ugat ng problema sa Italy in the case of Gramsci, or ugat ng problema sa America, right? So avoid those kind of reductionist approaches. Also, he was against ideologism or parliamentarism. This idea that ang kailangan lang naman gawin ng opposition is manalo ng opisina. All they have to do is to win over elected offices. Reducing everything to the contestation of elected office, right? And that will be fine. Basta yung matino yung presidente natin, pag nanalo si Lenny, okay na lahat. Well, guess what? It doesn't work that way. Even if we get the best leaders in positions of power, at the end of the day, if they have to deal with a fully corrupt Congress, if they have to deal with warlords at the LGU level, if they have to deal with corrupt officials inside the government, ang daming mong kaaway, ang daming points of resistance, ang daming mga bottlenecks, ang daming mga hurdles. History is replete with examples of good presidents coming in and then sinking because they are just overwhelmed by all of these corrupt people around them, by systemic corruption, institutionalist resistance by corrupt forces. So hindi sapat na manalo ka lang ng elected office. You have to go way beyond that. You have to go way beyond that. It's very important that if you want political change, you don't only get the right people in positions of power, you also fight for it. In the streets, mag-peace rally rin kayo. The right peace rally, for the right cause, right? You push for accountability through putting pressure on the government, through civil society, etc. So this was the beauty of Antonio Gramsci's argument, that you should dispense with any kind of reductionist approach. Moralism, bakit corrupt ng ganito administration, what we need is just moral suasion, everything will be fine. Well, it doesn't work that way. Economism, everything is just about inflation, it's about money, and vote buying, and no. It doesn't explain that way. Again, as I said, there are many historical examples whereby people who didn't have the most budget actually won, right? I mean, just look at the US, for instance. Donald Trump didn't have the biggest budget. Ang laki ng budget ng Democrats, talo pa rin sila. There's so many insurgent candidates, not only Duterte in the case of the Philippines, who were underfunded and yet they won because they were able to win the consent of the masses. as Gramsci will put it. So we have to avoid all sorts of reductionist simplistic argumentation if you want to look forward. Now, for Gramsci, modern politics in or politics in modern democracies is ultimately about winning the consent of the people through the art of persuasion, mobilization, and cultural enmeshment. Yes, yung mga iba pinagtatawanan tayo bakit tayo nagsasayaw-sayaw. Well, unang-una, okay naman yung sayaw natin. No, but you know, why not, right? If dancing and singing and all makes you more relatable, why not? There's nothing wrong with it. Basta just don't do buduts or ano, yung mga, you get what I'm saying, right? Sana may substance ka rin. Kung may substance ka tapos magaling ka pa magsayaw, edi okay lang, wala naman problema eh. Dapat relatable ka. Dapat relatable ka sa masa. Hindi pwedeng pupunta ka dyan and then you'll give a speech like Cicero and Seneca and pretend you're running for the Senadum of the Roman Republic. It is not going to work that way, right? You have to have that kind of plebeian touch. It's unavoidable in our era. You have to do your TikTok. You have to do your, different. Don't take yourself too seriously. If you take your mission seriously, you're willing to dance. You're willing to do the TikTok, etc. Because this is about folk culture. It's about relatability. It's about compassion, right? It's about building that connection and making it clear na hindi mo feel na special ka or you're above everyone else. That's why it's important, right? You have to be relatable. Now, of course, pag pilit naman siya, pag trying hard na relatable, sablay yung kang magsayaw, sablay yung TikTok mo, ganun, ibang usapan na yan. So if you're gonna do cultural enrichment, ayusin mo. If you wanna be funny, make sure maganda yung jokes mo. Kung gusto mo magsayaw, ayusin mo yung sayaw mo, right? Or at least, magpatawa ka ng sarili mo kung hindi ka magaling magsayaw, but at least you're trying, right? So this is something that Gramsci would say. You need cultural enmeshment. Dapat maintindihan mo anong kilitin ng tao, anong kilitin ng masa, anong kilitin ng mga voters, and then work along those ways. No, don't assume you're above them. Don't lecture them. Don't lecture them. Persuade them. Have dialogue with them. All right, and mobilization. Huwag kang tumakbo sa elections ng 11th hour lang or 12th hour almost, right? Prepare for it years ahead, right? And of course, Gramsci, he advocated for the creation of a new hegemonic bloc, essentially a robust coalition of like-minded forces undergirding a constellation of ideas and practices that create and preserve a new political order altogether. Ang mahalaga dito is, tignan mo, yung DDS movement ni Digong, I think came close to succeeding in a sense that meron siyang staying power. Marami pa rin sa ating mga kabayan naniniwala pa rin sa Dutertismo. Because at some level, Duterte was very effective in reaching into the hearts and minds of the Filipino people and presenting himself as really one of atin to pre, di ba? And if only he had listened to John Evasco, his campaign manager, he could have also created his own Chavismo social movement. Swerte tayo, Duterte was not smart enough or not mobilized enough to do that. But had John Evasco got his way of building yung kilusan para sa pagbabago, yari tayong lahat. Probably Duterte would have had something similar to what Narendra Modi has in BJP and RSS, or what Erdogan has in AKP in the case. So, swerte lang tayong DDS did not translate into a kind of a solid party or social movement. Otherwise, yari tayo. But that's what Gramsci wants people to do. Kaya nga, yung pink movement, it has to be a movement. It cannot be just a flash in the pan, right? You have to create a new hegemonic bloc, a robust coalition of like-minded forces. I keep on emphasizing like-minded because unfortunately sa ating bansa, parang gusto lang natin is you're either with me or the other side. It's a very immature approach to things. Parang i-criticize mo lang ng konti yung ginawa na etong politiko or etong politiko, immediately gusto ka nila i-cancel. So Duterte ka. If you criticize Lenny, DDS ka. You criticize DDS, Dilawan ka. You know, that's a very immature third world feudalistic way of looking at it. Right? And as I always said, no politician is above criticism. And like-minded. Kaya ang sabi ko, yung iba sa atin, mga kaibigan natin, huwag kayong echosera. You're trying to sow seeds of divisions among some of us vloggers and all who actually have very similar vision for our country. We may have different approaches. We may have different way of looking at things. But the fact of the matter, at the end of the day, guys, is this, na Ang gusto po natin is good governance. Ang gusto po natin is effective governance. Gusto po natin is umangat ang Pilipinas. So, kaya sabi ko, don't try to sow seeds of divisions. Diba? Support lahat ng mga like-minded vloggers and influencers, and of course, accordingly like-minded na mga tumatakbo sa Senado at mga iba't ibang posisyon sa darating na election at saka mga susunod na elections. Now, arguably, no thinker is more relevant to understanding the challenges of our crucial political moment than Gramsci, a journalist activist who perished in Mussolini's dungeons while heroically making sense of his political zeitgeist. Even Italy's current post fascist leader, I mentioned a while ago, Giorgia Meloni, is apparently a big fan of Gramsci, having recognized the genius of his analysis of modern politics, everything I discussed. Milan based writer Giorgio Giglioni writes, Meloni is convinced that the Italian left has succeeded since the end of World War II in dominating many institutions, cultural institutions, educational institutions, and now that she's in power, she's determined to reverse that imbalance, right? So actually, if you go to Italy, to a lot of their universities, they're very left-leaning. And in fact, if you look at Italy after 1945, from 1945 to 1995 or so, the Italian left, including the Communist Party (PCI), was extremely, extremely powerful, and they were in positions of power on multiple occasions until corruption scandals and crazy mafia stuff and all brought them down. But for a very long time, ang lakas ng left, political left in Italy, because they took lessons that Gramsci was sharing in 1920s. So in a way, he was prescient. No, he provided ideas about what his comrades and like-minded people should do in decades to come. Um, Now, obviously, I keep on saying Italy, Italy, Italy. Well, of course, Italy is a different country in terms of its level of economic development. They're an EU country, one of the biggest economy in the world, G7. But Italy shares a lot with the contemporary Philippines. It's a Catholic majority society. It has a besieged liberal elite. It has a marginalized political left and a resurgent right-wing populist leadership, right? So there's so many similarities, especially Italy of 1920s and southern Italy of Antonio Gramsci and today's feudalistic Philippines, right? So inspired by Gramsci's insights, I've spent the first weeks of the new year engaging folks across the progressive liberal spectrum in the best to the best possibility. I mean, to the best ability, to my best ability. In Bicol, we discussed this. I had the opportunity to exchange views, although briefly though, with Liberal Party stalwarts, whether it's Leila de Lima, Kiko Pangilinan, a little bit beso beso and talk with other friends, some exchanges of views with Bam Aquino, although I hope we had enough time, but he had to leave for Naga kagad. As well as, of course, with the dozens of priests and folks from the diocese, no, from the parishes there in Bicol. That was really interesting discussion. Unfortunately, I didn't get a video of that. Sa akin palagay, mas maganda pa yung discussion namin doon kaysa yung isa. I mean, both were great, but less lecture and more engaging in discussion. So when I say discussion, it was me and it was I and Dr. Chelo Magno gave back to back, mini lectures, and then nakaroon ng really panel discussions. I think the one in the morning was much better, but I was just so tired and traveling and all of that. Unfortunately, I didn't get to video it, and I was not sure if people were also comfortable with it. But at least the evening version is available with the better audio. I shared the link and I'll try to also upload it separately myself, right? But I really like the one in the morning when we were with like dozens, maybe 100 folks from the diocese and folks from Catholic priest background. Now they're very important because Gramsci always talked about the role of intermediaries. Priests, for instance, in Italy have been historically very important forces of social influence, right? Um, and especially if they're progressive, you have to work with them. Now, crucially, I also had, of course, a lot of discussions with Dr. Chelo Magno on the issue of anti-corruption, something that's very close to her heart, as well as post-Marxist sociologist Professor Walden Bellio, and of course, as usual, for a more tactical situational understanding of current politics, I'm using Perry Anderson's term, tactical situational. We had multiple podcast episodes and off the record, of course, exchanges with our very own Secretary Ronald Llamas. Now, the basic question at the heart of my exchanges were this: what should the genuine opposition do amid the festering yet indeterminate tug of war between the House of Marcos and House of Duterte? Why indeterminate? Because to be honest, hanggang ngayon hindi ko masasabi who would really come on top. Because the Dutertes are not relenting, and I think the momentum has really shifted significantly in favor of Duterte's in the past few days. And that's why ganito yung mga interventions natin. Now, currently, there are two types of risks. And I'm thankful to Cello, and I'm thankful to other folks who also essentially made me realize this point even more. Of course, it was at the back of my head. Ito kasi dalawang risk eh. Dun sa genuine opposition on one hand, the risk is that they may inadvertently end up as de facto allies of the administration by over-focusing on the impeachment of Sara Duterte and yung mga kababalagan ng mga Duterte. That's one definite risk. And the fact that, and tomorrow we'll talk to Congressman Percy about their impeachment complaint and all of that. I heard some optimistic news that there baka may galawan dyan sa Kongreso soon on the impeachment issue. But nevertheless, parang lahat ng mga nasa harap ngayon at lumalaban ay galing sa genuine opposition. Halos wala galing sa administration or aliado ni BBM. So, dapat sisigurado yun ng genuine opposition na hindi sila magpagamit dito. Right? But at the same time, and this is my point, others may also end up as unwitting enablers of the Dutertes by primarily focusing on the anomalies, most notably the recently passed controversial budget on the current administration. I know this raised eyebrows among some of our friends, but I hope people understand that I'm coming from this bigger framework of analysis. I'm literally quoting from Antonio Gramsci to you guys. I'm literally using a framework of analysis here, almost like a lecture here, right? Now, a Gramscian perspective, however, provides a dialectical way out of this seemingly impossible dilemma. Dialectical meaning not everything is either or. Things interact with each other and create new synthesis. That's how history unfolds per Hegel and the heirs of Hegel as far as intellectual tradition is concerned. Ito yung parati kong sinasabi. Hindi option na maging neutral or passive ang tunay na opposition. Why? Because to begin with, it's crucial for the genuine opposition to focus on the greater evil. Sino bang mas problematic? Sino bang mas threat sa ating demokrasya? Namely, the side that has not only been behind alleged corruption, confidential funds, POGO, Farmali, but also widespread extrajudicial killings and potentially treasonous gentlemen's agreement deals with Zhong Nanghai in more recent years. And remember, the confidential fund issue goes in Davao for decades, not just for a year or two. Hindi lang si Sara Duterte sa DepEd ang dapat focus natin. But, and this is what I don't understand with other people, but this doesn't preclude the opposition from also fiscalizing the excesses of the current administration. It's not mutually exclusive. Ulitin natin, it's not mutually exclusive. You can do both of them at the same time. Alright? Genuine opposition can adopt a dynamic approach whereby it adopts a war of maneuver, go for gold against the Dutertes, namely supporting potential impeachment and international criminal court trial against relevant members of the notorious dynasty, while also adopting a war of position of gradually building up their own momentum and political capital to serve as an effective check on any excesses by the current administration. In short, you can play the game of Go with BBM to prepare yourself for a showdown in 2028 and also to prepare yourself just in case if BBM wants to charter change or do something crazy. At the same time, you go for a war of maneuver. You go for a game of chess against the Dutertes if indeed you believe they're the greater threat. So again, you can have this fluid and dynamic approach. Ultimately, the genuine opposition should mobilize support, persuade new constituencies, including ex-loyalists, including ex-DDS, including people who don't care about politics or not involved in politics, bring them in, get them involved, persuade these new constituencies, nurture change makers. Hindi lang si Vico Soto na. Hindi lang si Vico Soto ang magaling dyan na kabataan. Marami po dyan na hindi pa natin kilala. Ngayon ko lang narinig yung ibang pangalan, right? Marami po dyan sa mga LGU level, sa mga probinsya, hindi sa mga malalaking syudad, na mga galing at change makers. We should nurture them. We should mention them. We should inspire them. We should support them. And then we also have to support decisive leaders. Huwag tayo magsuporta ng presidential candidate, vice president candidate na pahapiyaw-hapiyaw na hindi decisive. Go for decisive leaders who know what they want, who know what is needed, or willing to go all the way. That's very important. And organize well ahead of the next presidential elections. Organize as early as now for 2028. Ang dami nagagalit sa atin, bakit 2028 ka na 2028? Well, if there's one thing we should have learned from 2022 is that you cannot do things at the 11th hour. And that there's tremendous potential. Lenny went from 3% to 20+% when she got serious. Imagine what if she were prepared way earlier. What if Marcos and Duterte didn't come together. We could have had a completely different circumstance. The least you can do is to prepare. Nothing seems, in my opinion, as promising as reviving the pink movement, but this time with a greater focus on early mobilization, an inclusive campaign narrative, and a practical yet progressive policy agenda that could win the consent and votes of the majority of the Filipino voters. Or at the very least, because we don't have really runoff elections, the most number of votes for the presidential and vice presidential race in 2028. Hindi po yan imposible, hindi po yan far-fetched. It is very much doable. Who knows, maybe Sara won't run. Who knows, maybe Rafi Tulfo won't run. Who knows, maybe Lenny runs. Who knows, right? There's so many possibilities, but those possibilities will not be actual possibilities if you do not do your job, you do not prepare. All right? Okay, guys. So, today, seryoso tayo. Hindi tayo masyadong nagpapatawa and all of that because, I want to remind people why we created this podcast. We created this podcast because we wanted to have our own independent platforms kung saan pwede natin pag-usapan. Saan kayo nakakahanap? And I'm not saying this in a mayabang way. Show me another vlog where they're breaking down ideas by Antonio Gramsci from 100 years ago to make sense of what the pink movement can do in 2028. Right? This is why we created this platform. So, sobrang nagpapasalamat ako sa suporta niyo because binigyan niyo ako ng inspirasyon at energy and binigyan niyo ako ng dahilan para gawin yung mga ganitong tipo ng analysis. At actually, naisip ko nga, why not yung mga columns and articles ko na medyo serious, gawin natin basihan para sa mga ganitong diskusyon. Right? Of course, it's fun to talk about yung mga kalokohan ni BBM, kalokohan ni Duterte, etc. Yeah, of course we need that. Unfortunately, it's how social media works. But, ang pinakamahal natin gawin ay mga ganitong klaseng analysis. I mean, I don't want to call it lecture. It's really a kind of a conversation. It's kind of deep thinking, right? So for those who are interested, please check the article on Philippine Daily Inquirer. The title is Marcos, Marxism, and the Future of the Pink Movement. And then, of course, over time, I'll try to go back to Antonio Gramsci because I think he's really my biggest inspiration in terms of what should we do moving forward. Hindi dapat tayo maging moralistic, judgmental. Huwag tayo mag-cancel culture. Dapat bukas po tayo sa coalition building and working with different people. Dapat po flexible tayo mag-isip. Look at different things. Dapat po relatable po tayo. Yeah, sige magpiatos dance tayo and all. Actually, you can be very serious behind doing funny stuff. Because if what you're trying to do is to have a sense of the folk culture, maging relatable, do it. But of course, make sure you look fine, right? And make sure may totoong agenda ka na maganda para sa ating mga kabayan at ating bayan. Alright? So on that note, thank you very much again, guys, for giving us this opportunity, this chance. I'm not sure, honestly, if not for our platforms, yung mga ganitong sinusulat natin will be just for a limited audience. Chattering classes, right? And by the way, shout out to my students. Thank you so much for the great evaluation. Almost perfect. 5 out of 5. Great. I mean, I enjoy really my lectures and discussions with my students and all of that sa UP among others. At the same time, of course, we want to have this kinds of conversation for a broader audience, for a much broader audience. So, salamat sa inyo guys. Nagkaroon tayo ng ganitong mga platforms at napaisip tayo na baka naman, pwede ko naman i-transition dun sa mga sinusulat natin para sa vlogs natin or podcast natin because I think this is really what we really need. On that note, thank you very much sa ating mga kababayan. Please continue to support us, support all of us who are like-minded and fighting for a better Philippines. I know a lot of you may not agree with me. I know a lot of you, today I'm serious, of course. But, may mga days na sa tingin nyo, naman si Richard Pabebe and all. Yeah, we can have disagreements and all of that on a lot of issues. But at the end of the day, I think all of us know what's going on here, right? What's going on here is we're in an age of disruption, big things are happening, and neutrality, popcorn, nandun ka yung meme na, di ba yung meme parang sa India, Pakistan ba, yung guy nakahiga habang nagsusuntukan ng mga tao sa stadium, we cannot do that. We cannot afford that. We have to seize the moment. We have to seize the moment. You have to have audacity. If there's one thing I'll give to Trump, despite many of my disagreements, is at least the guy has the audacity, right? Medyo kapalmoks. Kailangan natin maging kapalmoks and we have to push it. We have to push it and we have to work with as many people as we can. We have to build our own coalitions, right? So get rid of that nonsense, pa-woke, cancel culture, yung mga nonsense, pa-purist stuff, na pa-cute stuff. That will not work. We have to work on coalition building. And we have to be compassionate and so coalition building, compassion, and yes, medyo kenkoy, right? If it's gonna be helpful. On that note, thank you very much. Maraming salamat. God bless and talk to you soon. Oh wow, dami rin natuwa dito sa TikTok. I think this is the highest response I've seen on TikTok so far, and 99% positive. Ano nangyari sa mga DDS natin? I think pag serious mode tayo, medyo hindi. Pag pabebe siguro tayo, magagalit na naman sila sa atin. Anyway, that's it. Thank you very much and talk to you soon. And please don't forget to also follow us on different platforms, including dito sa TikTok, because I think we really have to engage TikTok as much as possible. After all, Donald Trump, I love TikTok. I love TikTok. So maybe there's something there. Talk to you soon. Salamat po sa stars, supports, and stickers. Really appreciate it. Salamat po again sa stars, support, and stickers. Really, really appreciate it. And talk to you soon.